Thanks everyone for joining today's discussion. We'll talk about the Freethinker Institute's fifth intention, which is to give, receive, and reciprocate love. This intention really reflects our deepest values and is especially significant as we, a little bit late, honor the birth of Jesus Christ, a teacher of profound love and compassion. So we'll discuss the transformative power of love, its challenges, and its boundaries. I do think there are boundaries, even though I think we should love all of humanity and that that's a good thing to strive for someday. We're not all there, and that's okay. You don't need to be. And but I do think it's a good thing to strive for, and I'll try to explain why. And I may not in this presentation because it wasn't really about Agape. But if anyone wants to know, ask in the Q&A portion, and I'll talk about it. Um, We'll also reflect on whether some people are exceptions to the rule of universal love, or agape, and I'll argue that everybody deserves love, even though those who repeatedly harm us may not deserve our time and attention. I think they still deserve our love, and you can love someone without giving them your time and attention. So that's kind of a spoiler alert to the sort of pre-conversation we were having with DLJ earlier. So the fifth intention essentially brings us full circle after working on ourselves, seeking truth and learning and trying to be the best and trying to be fair, which is essentially learning to minimize harm and increase happiness, in my opinion. We arrive at a very profound value, which is love. It's a foundation of human connection and also a force that sort of brings together all of the intentions at the highest level. But I would argue that you know, really you have to love the right person in the right way, not there are wrong ways to love, if you will, and right ways to love, because certain times you can love someone in a way that ends up causing yourself harm. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as the presentation moves on. Um, I like to say everybody deserves love and compassion. I mentioned it earlier, but we've had people join. Everybody deserves love and compassion. Those who we feel deserve it the least are the ones who need it the most. And that kind of makes us realize that the people who are the most angry and hateful are usually the ones in the most misery. And so I would hope that that will get us to realize that those people actually need love and compassion even more than the rest of us. That doesn't mean we have to be the ones to bring it to them, day in and day out, even when they're being harmful or hateful. So I'll get into that in more detail. So um, basically, we're going to talk about some biblical foundations of love because I was inspired by this. Part one biblical quote, and one quote from Pope Francis, who is someone that I really admire for comments like this. So let's first talk about the Bible. Matthew 5:44 famously says, "Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." That's a pretty radical call to say to love your enemies, right? That was it's still bizarre to a lot of people today, 2000 years later, and saying to pray for those who persecute you. I would argue that's kind of in some ways, alluding to karma, that people who are persecuting you are going to get punished in some way, shape, or form at some point for punishing you, and so that's why you're praying for them. Um, which I argued in our event on karma that that's true. They will eventually be punished, whether in this life or after. Um, but essentially, similarly, Corinthians reminds us of love's virtues, patience, kindness, and humility. And the question is, like, are we truly living by these teachings? Like, if we look at a lot of people, even Christians, will, you know, have a lot of hate and anger towards people because they are illegal immigrants or they're homosexual, even though Pope Francis, I think, very interestingly said that being homosexual is not a crime. We're all children of God, including homosexuals. So I think that's interesting. And, maybe in another decade, it'll be trans people that are also children of God. But I don't think that the Catholic Church is ready for that quite yet. But I bet you that they will be in another 10 years. And hopefully Pope Francis lives long enough for the church to be ready for him to say it, because he's probably the type of person that would say something like that, if anyone would, as the head of the Catholic Church. So I challenge anyone here who is a Christian that thinks that we should, hate illegal immigrants or uh, gay people or anyone else for that matter. Why would God say to love even your enemies, but hate anyone, right? If you're loving your enemies, that's kind of like, those are the people going after you, like directly going after you, not just sitting in the eyes of God, which is what people claim these other people are doing. But why shouldn't we love everybody? And that's where I would argue the Bible itself calls on us to all have agape, or a love for all of humanity. Because if it says to love even our enemies, I think Jesus and the Bible are saying love everybody. And I kind of think that's the right path. And what I'm going to be talking about tonight is how you can do that in a way that does not cause you harm, because there are a lot of types of love that can cause us harm. Now, um, I also think that Jesus would have told us to love people for who they are. And if you ask, and I have asked my gay friends, and even gay people that I'm not friends with, but just like have met, I've asked whether or not they feel like they choose to be gay. And the answer inevitably has been no, I don't choose this. And so I find it interesting, and I think that that Jesus probably would have taught that you should love people for being their authentic selves, as long as they're not, causing harm to others or violating the Ten Commandments, et cetera, et cetera, which are generally, can mostly be focused on, you know, preventing significant unnecessary harm, and decreasing harm, and increasing happiness. But I think we should, help allow people to be their authentic selves. And the question that I ask people who I meet and have been friends with that dislike gay people is, did you choose to be straight? And some of them have tried to claim that they did, but I find that a little hard to imagine. And my response to that is, well, then you're just bi-curious at the very least, and you're just choosing which sex to be have an affinity towards by choice. But I know that I don't choose to be straight. Like, I couldn't choose to be gay even if I wanted to. It wouldn't be a choice for me. Um, next, the role of boundaries in love. While I do think that we should love all of humanity, it's really important that we set boundaries to protect ourselves. So love should be an act of giving that both helps the person that we're giving love to, as well as the person that's giving the love, as well as the person receiving the love. And love towards those that don't reciprocate, or actually worse, harm us, can lead to self-defeating situations. It's not about withholding love or not loving the person. It's just about protecting ourselves, because the fourth intention, which is before an eagerness to give and receive love intentionally, is about maximizing happiness and minimizing harm for ourselves and others. And that's not about selfishness. It's just saying that if we love someone who continuously harms us, then we're putting ourselves in harm's way. We are no longer taking care of our emotional and physical needs, potentially, one, the other, or both. And so it's just not a very practical decision, because you end up limiting your sphere of influence by causing harm to yourself, by exposing yourself to someone who is limiting your sphere of influence intentionally. And that's not a wise choice. So if someone is consistently causing us harm, I think we have to draw a boundary there and say, look, we're gonna, I generally try to give someone a final warning and say, look, you continue to act like this, I'm not going to interact with you anymore. And it's up to you, but I would recommend, being polite. And that's really the only thing that I ask of everybody, is to be polite. I don't mind if they have unsavory things to say. We've had people come on, the FTI events, and say things that I thought were pretty unsavory, but they were perfectly welcome to say it, because they said it politely. And I'm a big believer in free speech, but polite speech because people will be more receptive to that. Um, and um, and so I think that practical wisdom urges us to interact with people in a way that preserves our physical and emotional well-being, first and foremost. Because without that, we can't function effectively, and we can't really help other people unless our own physical and mental well-being is taken care of. And so I think every one of us owes to ourselves, taking care of our own physical and mental well-being first and foremost, which is preventing significant unnecessary harm. Because if our physical and mental well-being are impeded in a significant way, that's a significant harm that's happening to us. So whether a relationship is platonic or romantic, it does thrive with love. And when love is mutual, reciprocal love creates a foundation of trust and shared growth. So, for example, think about how empowering it is to help someone grow when they in turn appreciate you for who you are and your contributions to their growth. This is the kind of love that deepens over time, creating happiness for both individuals. And by seeking reciprocal love, we build stronger, healthier relationships that amplify joy and connection. Now, I want to say what that does not mean. That does not mean that love needs to be conditional on reciprocity, because we can give love to someone. And I like to say, keep your hopes high and your disappointment low. It's the only way to go. When you express love towards someone, be hopeful that they'll reciprocate it. And if they don't, okay, cool, they didn't. Don't be disappointed by that. Just say, all right, well, maybe this person isn't in a place right now to reciprocate love, and you can try to get through to them. As long as they're not causing you significant harm, you can try to get through to them. But there's also a point at which you have to say, maybe this person isn't ready to reciprocate love. But it's interesting as I've gotten older, is like I see some people are good at giving love but not receiving it. Some are good at receiving it and not giving it. And I think the ideal scenario is where you can give, receive, and reciprocate love, in as many cases as possible. That's what creates the healthiest relationships in my experience, is when you can express love to other people, both platonic and romantic, again, as well as receive love from other people, and that when you receive it, you also give it back. That doesn't mean that it's conditional. Again, it means that it's healthier if you reciprocate, and it's more mutually beneficial if you reciprocate. You make people feel good to let them know that their affection for you is appreciated. And so I would argue that's what we should strive for, is to give, receive, and reciprocate love, which is why it's part of the fifth intention. So, universal love, or agape, teaches us to love all of humanity, even those who harm us. But that does not mean allowing that harm into our lives. I kind of alluded to this earlier. You want to make sure that you're not extending. You want to extend compassion to other people, but do it in a way that doesn't leave yourself exposed to having harm caused to you repeatedly, in a way that is debilitating or reduces our own capabilities in a significant way. That doesn't mean that like, it doesn't mean just because you separate yourself from someone that you don't love them. Like, you can separate yourself, and I've had many people who I try to be very helpful to get very angry at me and say, I don't need your help. And I'm like, okay, no problem. I'll back off. You don't need my help, then I'm not going to try to help you. I was only trying to be helpful. And, some people get angry at the idea that anything could improve them. Some of us recognize that we're flawed and that we have lots of room for improvement, and we want to keep learning from each other. And that's generally what FTI members are about, is we want to be the best version of ourselves, which inherently means we know we're flawed. And I like to joke, the only people that think they're not flawed are actually the most flawed people on earth, because they stopped growing as soon as they started thinking they were perfect. And so, really, those of us who are flawed and acknowledge that we're flawed are the ones that are continuing to grow and learn. Um, and so, for someone who is repeatedly harming us, we can separate ourselves from them and still say, look, I care about this person. I'm not going to send them, negative energy or wish death or torture on them or anything bad. which by the way, we had a very interesting we had a PhD in I forget what his PhD was in. I think it was psychology or it was he was a PhD and he did an experiment where um you know three or four people left the meeting and everybody who was not in the meeting and they couldn't hear what we were saying or hear anything about the meeting and they were supposed to come back in exactly 5 minutes. And then while they were gone, we had two rounds. One round where everybody thought really horrible, negative, just the most horrible things they could imagine about these people. And then the other one where they thought the nicest, most positive thoughts. And the people who were missing actually, when the negative thoughts were going on, their hearts were racing, they were like nervous. And then the other one, they were like calm and relaxed. And you can't make this stuff up. It was like a very interesting experiment that baffled me. And he said that it's been repeated many times where they switched the order. It wasn't about the order. And, it actually, there is some sort of thing going on. And I'm just going to call it some sort of human connection going on that when you're wishing negative things on people, there is some impact that it has on their psyche. And that experiment kind of showed it to me in a way that I know the guy and I know that these people were not part of the experiment. They were randomly chosen or opted in to be the ones to be selected. And and so all I can say is that I don't think we should have negative thoughts toward people. We should, have a love at a distance and hope that they will grow and learn from their mistakes. There was a great quote that I learned about recently called lessons that are not learned will be repeated until they are. And I think that's very true. And I think that's why we're on this earth is to learn certain lessons. And if we don't learn them, we'll be reborn again and need to learn them in the next life. So we might as well learn as many lessons as we can in this life and the next, because that's the path to growth and the path to happiness. And basically, long story short, you want to balance love with keeping your own physical and mental health in good shape. And that's crucial to part of the fifth intention, which is give, receive, and reciprocate love. But it's also why the fifth intention comes after the fourth intention, which is to prevent significant unnecessary harm, including such harm as would come to you by continuing to expose yourself to someone, if that's hopefully clear now. So next is, and I kind of already covered this. So sometimes I get ahead of myself. So, um, basically, when I guess just to be really explicit, the idea is that if you love, if your love is misdirected or is a love that is causing, or you are loving someone who is causing you or other people harm, then that contradicts the fourth intention, which is why the fourth intention comes before the fifth, even though I think love is, in some respects, more beautiful of a thing than minimize harm and maximize happiness. If you're not minimizing harm and maximizing happiness and preventing significant unnecessary harm first, then the love can be destructive. And so it can be self-destructive for us. And so that's just to be really clear on why, why the fourth intention comes before the fifth, even though love is very important. Um, and then action steps for living the fifth intention. So, you want to start by observing other people's needs with empathy, understand what matters to them, and offer help without expecting anything in return. That kind of selfless love enriches both you and the person that you're giving that affection towards. And then we all have to prioritize where we put our time and attention. So I would say, you can choose from amongst the many relationships you have, and it's good to have a lot of relationships, friendships as well. Friendships is what I'm mostly referring to as relationships. Um, and um, for people who are at least appreciate and say kind words for your affection are the ones worth continuing to give love to. And, that way, out of the many people that if you've given positive vibes, if you will, to a lot of them, and some are appreciative and some are not, who are you going to continue to, spend your time and effort with? Well, you're going to want to spend that time and effort with the people who are, responding at least in a positive way. Although sometimes, there's I've had people that started out really negative towards me, and I was just consistently positive and turned people from enemies to friends. And I think that's great. And I think there's a good place in trying to encourage people to be more positive. But there's also a point at which you have to say there's diminishing returns and where you psychologically no longer want to deal with the negativity that that person is bringing into your life. So there's no quick, easy, foolproof silver bullet solution here. But you do want to balance balance the effort and the response. I also want to introduce something called the platinum rule. And so first I'm going to say why the platinum rule instead of the time-honored golden rule. The golden rule says to treat others the way we want to be treated. Well, I love speaking Spanish, and I actually want everyone to speak to me in Spanish. But if I speak to all of you in Spanish right now, probably most of you don't speak Spanish, even though I want to be spoken to in Spanish. If you don't speak Spanish, it's actually quite rude of me to speak Spanish to all of you, right? Like, it doesn't make sense that I speak to you in Spanish, but the golden rule says treat you the way I want to be treated, and I want to be spoken to in Spanish. So there's a slight flaw in the golden rule, if I could be so flippant to put a flaw in a rule that's in almost every religion in the world and is super wise, by the way. And when the golden rule came about, it taught a huge amount of people empathy, because people weren't even putting themselves in other people's shoes. And it created a huge amount of empathy. So it was a great piece of wisdom. It still is for most people. So I'm not trying to knock it. I'm just saying, just because it's a beautiful piece of wisdom doesn't mean we can't improve on it. And so, me being an inventor and
Hope
I've always
everybody blessed, bro. I hope everybody doing good. Everybody stay up. Whatever y'all going through, keep y'all heads high, bro.
so uh so just because it's good wisdom doesn't mean we can't improve on it. And so the platinum rule actually was first published in the 60s and 70s, and it says you should treat other people the way they want to be treated. And there's a small flaw that's actually quite good wisdom because it says get to know other people and what they want and treat them the way they want to be treated. So if you guys want to be spoken in English too, then I'm going to speak English to you. If you want to be spoken in Spanish too, then I'll speak Spanish to you. And now I'm treating you the way you want to be treated, which is generally pretty good. But I have twin daughters that are 7, as some of you know. Well, if one of my daughters says, well, I just suddenly decided to her sister that you're going to watch everything I want to watch on TV, and that's how I want to be treated. And so you're going to always treat me that way, and I get to watch everything I want, and you don't get to watch anything you want. Would that be fair? Well, clearly that wouldn't be fair. So I like to add a small caveat to the platinum rule that I added myself to try to fix that flaw, which is treat other people the way they want to be treated, unless there's a good reason not to. And, I think in general, it's good to strive to treat people the way they want to be treated. But if someone abuses that thoughtfulness, then you can say, well, I have a good reason not to do it in this case, so I'm not going to. Now, it requires judgment. Again, it's not a silver bullet, right? And it requires judgment and it requires critical thinking skills. But if you use the 5 intentions along with the modified platinum rule, I call it, I think it's a pretty solid way to guide yourself in treating other people and think about how to treat other people in a way that creates mutually beneficial relationships. Now let's open the floor for discussion. I would love to hear what your thoughts are on the ideas of well, let me give a couple of I'm going to throw out a couple of questions, and I also want to say that please limit let me make Carl co-host. Please limit comments or questions to one comment or question at a time. Limit the length of the comment or question to 2 or 3 minutes so everybody gets a chance, as long as their hands up. If there are no hands up, you're welcome to go longer. And then if you want to respond to what someone just said by asking a clarifying question or making a comment on the same subject, just speak up after they talk and jump in. But try to keep those clarifying questions or quick comments to less than 20 seconds so that we can bounce back and forth on the topic. I'm going to throw out a couple of questions as food for thought. about what are your ideas on whether or not everybody deserves love. Are there situations where it's too difficult to extend love, and how do we navigate that? And how do you balance universal love with self-preservation in your own life? And I'd love to hear insights and personal experiences on boundaries of love. And I want to close with one quote from Maya Angelou, which is, "Only by giving are you able to receive more than you already have." And I think that's a great quote and reminds us all that giving love is a good thing, and it opens you up to receiving even more than you've given and more than you already have. Love is a gift that we can give the world, but also a gift for ourselves, because we generally feel good and better when we give to other people. There are a lot of studies that show this, as those who are givers are happier people. And so, I have made an argument successfully to a self-declared egotist that it is actually in their best interest to give to others, because if they give to others, those people will in turn be nice and give back to them. And they just logically, even they were a logical thinker, even though they were a self-declared egotist, they logically got it. And so I would argue even an egotist winning strategy is to be a giver. And hopefully that will mean that at least some people fake it till they make it and are still givers, even if they're egotists. And I'm okay using a logical argument to sort of show someone that it's in their best interest to be a nice person, even if they're putting themselves first. And with that said, I would love to also know in the chat if you learned anything today and if this was useful. So thank you all for your time and attention. And now let's open it up to comments, questions, and anything that people want to talk about on the topic of love and compassion. And Carl, you have your hand up, so go ahead.
I do. Yeah. Thank you. And Happy New Year, everyone. Unfortunately, I had plans to be here on time and other plans happened. Life is what happens when you make other plans. And so I
Exactly.
made a lecture. So in true platinum rule fashion, I would like you to redo the lecture for me. That's the way I would like to. That's okay. But if you have a good reason not to, which I can imagine you do, that's okay. I'll watch the recording. But I just wanted to know yeah, I'll just listen in mostly. And if I have any thoughts that come up, I'll
Cool. I'm
respond.
sure you'll be able to add lots of meaningful value just in the conversation portion without showing up, which is what I tried to do in those book discussions when I didn't have time to read the book, which I will admit happened to me once or twice in school.
Yeah.
Anyone else, comments, questions? Was this useful? Jenna?
Uh, Thanks so much, Garrett, for the presentation. Um, I hope that we could have like more presentation and discussions like this also in the future. My question would be, is that um, so you and VLJ mentioning about respect and dignity earlier, and there is something that I learned about respect, which is I learned that there is like a two types of respect, which is the inherent respect and the earned respect. So they say that like the inherent respect is the respect that we give to the humanity, um, regardless of who they are. And the earned one requires a lot of level of trust, um, mutual trust, and empathy, and like a lot. I guess also love and compassion for the earned for the respect to be earned. Um, I guess like just go back to my question is that do you think that the inherent respect is the one that is associated with the dignity that we have for the humanity as well, or like the way that also we thought that we also have to love our neighbors. Yeah, sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought there, but yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
It's a great question. I'm going to let DLJ respond as well because it was, I think, partly to his comment. But I really like, first of all, we will have more presentations and discussions like this. We do them every Tuesday, so please come back. I'll try to put the event, next week's event in the chat so that people can sign up for that before you leave tonight. But yeah, I really like the way that you put it in that there are two types of respect. I would actually want to build on that and say it's not just two types of respect, um it's it's two types, one of which has multiple levels. I do think that we should be respectful to all human beings, and that's why our only rule in the FTI is to be polite to everybody, even if you dislike them and you really think what they're saying is a horrible, horrible thing to say. It's still important to be respectful to them when interacting with them, because if you're not, they're not going to pay attention to what you have to say, and they're not going to listen to you, and you won't be able to convince them of anything. Because if someone gets angry at you, and the first thing we do is we get emotionally hijacked by the person who's angry at us, and we see them as the other and the enemy, and we stop listening to them with an open mind. We feel like they're the bad guy, right? And so I like to say, as soon as you lose your emotions, you also lose the logical argument. And so even if you have the logical argument in the bag, you're still going to lose it when you lose your emotions because you look like the bad guy. You lost your emotions. And so everybody, should see the person who's losing their temper. Or I think the quote is, when you lose your temper, you lose the argument. Something like that. So I really like the way you put it, and all I would do is say that the earned respect that you were talking about, Jenna, has many levels, right? And there's earned respect of someone who's been kind to us for 10 or 15 minutes after a brief conversation. And then there's the earned respect of someone we've known a lifetime, trusted our deepest secrets with, and can continue to trust those deepest secrets with for the rest of our lives, right? Those are two extreme levels. And then there's everything in between those, which is another level of, which are different levels of earned respect. So I really like the way you put it. I haven't heard it said that way, and I thought it was a very wise way of putting it. So thank you for sharing that. And I don't know if DLJ, if you wanted to confirm or deny Jenna's assertion. I agreed with her, but I'm curious what you thought.
Okay, quickly, because there's two in the queue. Yeah, I'm cool with that. It's semantics largely. I mean, languages change, right? So we have the expression of I've lost respect for someone, right? So obviously respect therefore is conditional. Whereas for me, dignity is it's something I choose to project to everybody, irrespective of who they are. So I'm going to break a habit of a lifetime and agree with you, Garrett, in principle for the presentation. Yes, I agree with it. Some of the terminology, I might use dignity instead of love, for example.
Cool. And Sabrina, go ahead. And I'm going to post the next week's event, by the way, is on trade tariffs that are coming and what the impact will be. So I'll put that in the chat. And Sabrina, go ahead.
I wanted to talk about boundaries, but now DLJ distracted me with what he just said.
That's okay. You can comment on what he said, or we can come back. I'm sure there will be plenty of time. We have an hour and 20 minutes left.
So, boundaries and families,
Mm-hmm.
right? And keeping those, I think, sometimes it's hard because you seem to be able to break those boundaries a lot more easier with family, with people that you love, right? Than with the stranger. So I often find that interesting and why we are so willing to break those. And then the other issue that where sometimes a boundary for you might not be a boundary for me, and how do you balance those things? So I was wondering if you could just comment on that.
So when you say you seem to be able to break those boundaries more with people you love than strangers. Do you mean by break those boundaries, like allow people to hurt us longer when they're people we love?
Right. Or yeah, because you allow it, you're more likely to allow, let's say, your brother or sister to say something that may be a friend, you might be able to speak up a bit faster, right? So why is that? And also for women, I think it's also a lot more difficult because there's the expectation of always being nurturing, right? So one gets tied to the other one, though it's not necessarily true.
Hmm. So the I think that there's actually a logical explanation for why we put up with more from people we love is that we have a deeper bond and it's harder to break a deeper bond. And so we'll let someone that we love deeply hurt us even more because we have that deeper bond and can recover from more pain and anger. The question comes where like how much is how much you can bear and how quickly will you alert that person that they're causing harm to you. And I think that gets into degrees and subtleties of like how much are you willing to put up with, how much are they receptive to the feedback, and how much do you value the relationship. And there are a whole host of factors that play into that. But I think it does make logical sense that we'll let those we're closest to hurt us the most. And it also makes sense that they can hurt us the most because they know us the best and they know how to hurt us the most if they want to, and they're angry. And that's where, like, when people get angry, they often say things they don't mean, out of anger, not because they really want to hurt you, but because they're just being, they're getting revenge, right? And there's this seductive nature of revenge of like, someone hurt me or they perceived that you hurt them, and then they want to hurt you back. And so, I don't know if that makes sense, Sabrina, but that's kind of my take on why we let people we're close to hurt us more.
Yes, but also, and this is where I have a problem with it, right? Because they're closer to you, you would think that they would know better.
They do. And this is where like um some people, you know, will pretty much like never like use their knowledge of you to cause harm to you. And then other people will use it to cause harm to you. And all I can say is like um you know that is a reflection of their character more often than it is a reflection of you. And I'll pull up a quote on that. Uh, does that make sense, Sabrina? Just at a
Yes,
level?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
And
Um,
the quote is that when someone is negative towards you, it comes in decreasing probability from reflection, where they basically are reflecting back negativity you sent to them, from deflection, where someone was negative to them and they're deflecting it to you, projection, where they have their own inner negativity and they're projecting it onto you, misunderstanding, where they have a misunderstanding causing them to be angry at you. And then lastly, the least likely possibility is that it's an accurate assessment of your flaw. So yes, you should always be open that someone's negativity is an accurate reflection of your own flaw, but that's actually the least likely reason that someone's being angry at you or being upset at you.
I like that quote that you just did.
Thank you. I can put it in the chat. There's a little more, but it's already long, so I just stopped there.
All right, thanks.
No
Yeah, I
problem.
appreciate that.
Um, Kerry, how are you, buddy? Good to see
Doing all
you.
right. Glad
Glad to hear
glad
it.
to see you again. So my initial question, I'm going to try to keep it to one point, but I'm going to have more down the road. So I want to kind of just establish what you think the proper foundations are. And I'm curious because when you talk about the intentions,
Hmm.
right? I understand if you base them in kind of humanist philosophy or even in game theory, that's all well and good. But what I'm wondering is to me that implies not only that in nature there's a scorekeeper, but some objective standard, right? If we have to learn lessons, right? If it's not just we're doing good things because it's a good thing to do independent of things, but if we also are eyeing, this ball that it's like there's a mission we're on that has some kind of objective standards in terms of learning these lessons. What do you make of a claim that it doesn't seem like nature values any of the intentions, unless we're going to say that nature deems the harms that we suffer as necessary?
So, what makes you think that nature doesn't value the intentions?
Well, I mean, if I'm not supposed to cause anyone unnecessary suffering, I hear many people say, well, boy, life is full of suffering. So the implication is that if nature had a choice, either we wouldn't suffer or the suffering that we do endure is necessary.
Well, you're assuming nature in that case is like omnipotent, benevolent, like force, right?
Well, not even that, because what I'm saying is that if there is something in nature that can keep score, and at least to the extent where upon my death I either advance or stay in the same spot or move backwards, there's at least that power. But
Yeah.
I guess what I'm wondering is when I'm sitting here in my unprivileged spot from this sense of knowledge where I'm trying to figure out this game without the rule book, it's hard for me to figure out what the goal is. Not that I couldn't agree that your rules seem to make a lot of sense, but I'm just wondering how it applies to nature. And I guess later I'll have more that kind of this will make more sense in the context of this conversation, but that seems so foundational. I'm just curious what you had to say.
Yeah, so I think that the five intentions actually are something that nature respects. And if you take the example of increasing happiness and decreasing harm, or well, let's take the first intention, which is fairness, right? You take the example of monkeys. You can give a monkey a banana, but if you give another monkey something better than a banana, and then you give him a banana, he's going to throw the banana at you like, hey, why are you giving that guy something better than me? He's right in front of me. I saw what you just did. And he's going to be mad. He's going to throw a perfectly good banana at your face because it's unfair. And so monkeys clearly value fairness. And so I would argue every animal values fairness to some degree. We just notice it in monkeys because they're closer to us. But I would argue that pretty much every animal values fairness. And I would argue they would value truth, and you could probably create experiments that show that they value truth as well as fairness. So that's the first intention. And being the best version of yourself, like standing up for truth and fairness, is essentially being the best version of yourself. So if they value both of those, they want to be the best version of themselves too, because they're willing to sacrifice their own food source to, you know, basically be fair. And so I do think nature values the five intentions. I'm just going to defend the one for now, but I'll say a lot of people, when I share the five intentions with them, not a high percentage, but a significant number of people, because I've shared it with many, will go, of course, these make perfect sense, and this is how I live my life, and why would anyone do differently? And they just feel like it's naturally intuitive. And most people do. See the value in them. And so I would argue that they're you know, they came through a lot of careful thought about how I could nail down what are a small, simple set of rules that you can't think of any exceptions to. And I'm really good at finding exceptions to stuff. So good that I took an SAP programming class and I learned how to doctor books using SAP's programming language. I won't talk about it anymore. They've probably fixed it by then, since then. But I'm just saying I'm really good at finding exceptions to stuff. So I shot holes in these five intentions many, many times, and I'm sure that they're going to need to be improved again as I continue to share them. And I actually had a good conversation with some colleagues at the World Ethics Organization, where I'm an advisor, and we sort of rephrased a few of them, and made a few small tweaks. But essentially, they're going to become the ethical code for the World Ethics Organization, or a big part of the ethical code. And I also built an ethics bot, which actually I should share here. I built an ethics bot that will teach you how to make more ethical decisions using what is essentially the five intentions in a here it is. Um, the ethics bot. So try putting your ethical quandaries into this bot, and if it ever gives you an answer that you don't like, send it to me, and I'm going to tell you if there's a good reason that we need to either change the ethical code or that maybe you're stuck in confirmation bias. Just be open that you might be stuck in confirmation bias. So, but it's possible that we need to improve things, and if we do, then I will. Um, so, I do think that nature recognizes the five intentions, and I think that the lessons we need to learn are really about following the five intentions. That's why I'm so intent on creating a membership organization. Which, Carrie, you haven't joined yet. You should really join as a member. I think you would like it. But I want to help people adopt the five intentions into our lives because I think it helps people live better, happier lives for ourselves and the people we can influence. And so, I have that bold claim that I think that the five intentions are aligned with nature and that they align with people's intuition if we're really honest with ourselves.
Well, thank you. And the ethics bot sounds like a really fun diversion.
Play around with it. Tell me what you think.
Okay, thank
Thank
you.
you, Carrie, for your question. And Katie, go ahead. Good to see you as well.
Yeah, your
Or hear
past
you.
your past presentation about reflection deflection was wonderful. That's definitely helped me. I usually see like reflection times something. So you see like, oh, you don't say hi to them. So next, the person's
Yep.
walking on the other side of the street and you're like, oh, reflection. Uh,
Hmm.
for me, if I'm starting to see somebody as an enemy, I find that I can make somebody to have positive feelings for almost anybody if I put enough distance between me and the person. So it's always like that's not always possible, but I find that that's the way for me to make sure that I see the humanity of everybody.
Say that again. So you if you're starting to see someone as an enemy, you can make someone else have positive feelings, or you can have positive feelings for them if you put enough distance.
I can have positive feelings for them. Because, like,
Yeah,
for example, for me, I feel no hate when I'm watching the worst of conflict. Sometimes I even laugh at some of the things that Putin does. Like, I'm like, that's kind of funny. That is scary. That's how you scare people. And that's not funny for the person if you're sitting there wondering whether that's going to happen to you.
right.
So
Yeah, yeah. But I hear you. And I think that makes sense. And that's part of what I'm suggesting is that, well, actually, for the people who cause us so much harm that we feel like we need to separate from them, we'll be able to have more love for them if we separate ourselves from them, which is, I think, what you're saying. Um, and we can just hope that they end up learning from their mistakes, and we should always be honest that it may be us that has a mistake and we can consider that. But if we consider it duly with an open mind and use our critical thinking skills, and it turns out, no, they're the ones making the mistake, sometimes it's just them making a mistake, and that's okay. And what I say is, I wish you wisdom. And I do. I wish the people that I think are the most confused, I wish them wisdom. And I wish everybody wisdom, including the people that I think are already very wise, but I usually don't have to tell them because they're already usually very wise. The people that I wish the most wisdom on are often the ones that need it the most. And I do wish it on everyone though, because I think wisdom is the path that we're all on this earth to learn wisdom. And I'm trying my best to learn wisdom and teach it, which is what I've done my whole life is learning and teaching. And I hope we can teach each other wisdom together in these events and in membership events for people that want to join, which by the way, I'll share the Google Doc on the FTI for people that want to learn more about the FTI. What other questions do people have or comments or anything? Yeah, Carrie, go ahead.
Okay, so this is something I've been working on, and I'm glad you started with fairness. as the first of the intentions. And I I'm wondering if people, I absolutely agree that human beings and many animals at a minimum have this inherent sense of fairness. But I'm wondering if it's somewhat our intuition is asymmetrical. And but what I mean by that is if somebody does me wrong, I'm really quick to recognize that and say that's unfair. However, it seems like when people have power over somebody else, they are less quick to see their exercise of power over that individual, which that individual may seem as unfair. They have a harder time recognizing it as unfair. And I'm thinking, an easy example is, the parent telling the child, no, you can't go to your friend's house or you can't start dinner off with a fudge sundae. The child is, that's unfair, and they feel righteous indignation. And the parent is like, well, I'm the parent and this is just the way it is. And if you look at the way, I mean, that's like the most benign, and I think most of us can justify that because the parent has this perspective that's privileged. But when we can see, and it is done ostensibly for the best interest of the child. However, when we see, politicians or corporations or folks that have asymmetrical power over folks, there's this idea that, well, maybe that's not so benevolent and it's not in our best interests. And again, the people who are aggrieved seem to be very quick to recognize that unfairness, but not so much the people perpetrating it, or at least they can justify it to themselves somehow. What do you see in terms of how we deal with that, if you even think my premise has any legs?
So, I do think that it's easier to see when someone else has done us an injustice than it is for us to see that we're, abusing power is kind of the way that you were referring to it. I think that that's true, but I don't think that that's because of a lack of ability to recognize what's fair inherently when we're seeking it. I think it's a lack of desire to seek what's fair before seeking what we want. And I gave another event where I talked about how egotism is the enemy of mankind and the root cause of all preventable evil. And when we abuse our power, we're doing what we want, which is what the ego is saying, I want this, and we're ignoring whether or not it's fair or not because we have the power to do it and we can do it and no one can stop us. So we're just going to do that and we're going to justify it because I wanted it and that's what matters. But if we actually change the order of things like we do with the five intentions and we say, look, what we want is not what's most important. What's most important is what's fair to everybody. And you put fairness first, then you'll find over time, as you practice that, it becomes more and more natural. And now, I build a lot of great business relationships because I put fairness first. And, if I earn a commission on something, I'll go, oh, if you are going to help me earn that commission, let's split it 50-50. And some people are like, what? Split it 50-50, right? Like most people don't even tell you what their commission is if they're earning a commission, let alone split it 50-50 with you. They're going to say, how about I just offer you this? Does that sound fair? And they don't tell you what they're getting,
Right.
right? And for me, it's like, look, I'm going to tell you transparently what I'm getting. And quite frankly, not only that, like there have been times where I recognized an imbalance and other people had more of an influence on a commission than I did, and I give them more of the commission that I'm getting. And in fact, on a very regular basis, I try to set people up to make more money than I do. And I'm like, look, I'm going to put you forward and I'm going to make you more money than I make. And I like to say, I don't introduce people to opportunities that aren't better for them than they are for me. They have to be at least as good as they are for me. And most often, I introduce people to things that are better for them than they are for me. But that's because my goal is to either be fair or be extra generous. And go
I was
ahead.
just so if ego is the enemy, is empathy the necessary antidote?
I have to think about that, but my gut says, yeah, probably like I actually think that empathy is what gets you to fairness, right? When you empathize with the other person, really what you are desiring is for fairness because you say, I can put myself in this person's shoes and maybe not just, and fairness, by the way, I was recently corrected by someone. Fairness is not technically defined the way that we're using it. What we're defining is really justice. Um, fairness is, but I'm getting a little finicky here on, so the example, and I looked this up in the dictionary because it didn't make sense to me. Everybody uses fairness the way that we're describing it today. But ironically, the dictionary will describe the difference between, like if one person is starving to death and another person is like heavily, heavily overweight and just ate, the dictionary says fairness is giving them each an equal amount of food instead of giving the food to the person who's starving to death. And that's to me nonsense. No one uses the word fairness that way, but it's like saying that, if you're playing like a dice game in a casino and you have weighted dice at the casino, that's an unfair die. A fair die is one that rolls each side of a six-sided die an equal amount of times. That's what they mean by fairness. And so it's equal. Equality is fair, whereas anything unequal is unfair, but maybe just and justified. And so that's the way that it's technically defined. But I'm getting like I hate semantic arguments, and this person made a very big semantic argument, and I accepted that they were right because I looked it up in the dictionary, and the examples that they gave were right there, and ChatGPT validated them as well. And I just said no one really uses it that way, but okay, from our conversation forward, I'm going to say justice, and I may need to change the word fairness in the five intentions to just. But it's like the problem is like in common parlance, justice is like a punishment sort of thing. And that's not how I mean it. I mean it more in like a softer, like, let's treat everybody in a way that's commensurate with the way they deserve to be treated with the platinum rule. And so I chose fairness instead of justice very intentionally, even though I'm a practicing Stoic, and justice is one of the Stoic virtues, because justice has taken on a different sort of term. And I'm sorry, I'm digressing a bit on definitions, but um, I think it's important because it's a question of like, should we change the word in the five intentions, one of the North Star words of fairness versus justice. And so I think it's important to nitpick a little bit about definitions when it's something so foundational to the FTI. So that's why I'm choosing to do it.
I think that's it's as nitpicky as it might be, I think it's super important, especially when folks can look at things like our justice system and say, well, justice may have been served, but was it fair? How much do we take into account the different initial conditions of different people in a similar situation, et cetera? Thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, I like the word fairness for what we're trying to say.
Yeah, and the justice system is very often unjust, especially when it legalizes bribery.
I know how when we think about the word justice as opposed to the adjective. I think we got a echo. Hold on.
Sorry, go ahead.
Um, when you think the word justice versus just, right? The adjective just to me says fairness as opposed to justice when you think of that. But what you were talking about, Garrett, reminds me of kind of like the difference between equality and equity. And I really never understood the difference until I saw this little cartoon, and I'm sure people have seen it on the internet, where you see a fence and you see like three kids, and they all have different heights. So there's a short, medium, and tall kid. The fence is straight, and basically equality would be given each of the kids the same size box. And so they will all be above, right? Include the small kid might still not be able to see the game because it's the same size box. Equity is giving the right size box to each kid so they all end up equal above the fence. Does that make sense? Yeah, so I think it kind of like that's kind of to me that seems fairer, right? It kind of reminds me of what you said about the overweight.
And that's where like the dictionary definition would say fair is giving everyone an equal box, but I don't think that
Right.
would be fair. Like, and I don't think if you walked up to 10 people and said, "Is this fair?" and they looked at that cartoon, they'd go, "No, that's not fair."
Exactly,
Right?
right? Yeah.
But the dictionary seems to say that's fair. So this is one of those cases where I think the dictionary is out of touch.
Yeah. Or if you took the sense of fairness plus common sense equals that.
Right.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Because it would be common sense that the equal boxes don't really work.
Yep.
Works for some people. Yeah.
Or the promoter of the game is going to say, make them all buy a ticket.
There you
Sorry, I had to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, that brings up an interesting debate. Is capitalism fair?
Well, that's you know, we don't have a lot of hands up, so I could go into that, but if we run out of things to talk about, let's bring that back up, Carl,
I mean,
because
I know you did a lecture on it, so
I
maybe you could say
did.
compassionate capitalism,
Generous capitalism. I would argue
generous
generous
capitalism, or
capitalism is fair.
conscious, yeah,
And
conscientious,
what
conscious
we're in
capitalism.
right now, which is greedy capitalism, is
Right,
unfair. So,
right.
Ryan, though, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, capitalism exists on a spectrum. I think we all know that intuitively, that on one hand you have compassionate capitalism, on the other hand you have less than fair and perhaps even cannibalistic capitalism. And I cited as an example the student loans program. You're pitting two age groups against each other, where if you really want to have a secure retirement and don't want to get leveled, again, like many people did in 2008, well, you invest in these very nice Sally Mae bonds, and they're secure. Well, they're secure because you can't default on your student loans. They'll attach to your Social Security if you happen to be in the unenviable position. A friend of mine who was a stay-at-home mom for 45 years and took care of him. Then her husband left her. She went back to school. Well, she was 60 years old when she graduated and had like $70,000 in debt. And nobody wanted to hire a 60-year-old because, yeah, you're only going to have her for 4 or 5 years. So now she's not only broke, but also 70 plus $1,000 in debt. Um,
Ryan,
but
if
we,
it's
yeah,
federal debt and she hasn't negotiated it, reach out to me and I can get her out of 70 to 90% of that debt. Goes for anyone with federal student debt, with more than $20,000 of federal student debt, I can get them out of 70 to 90%, 70 to 100%.
there is like 10 times the value of the call already, which has already been wonderful. Thanks.
Good.
Um, so yeah, you have compassionate capitalism and cannibalistic capitalism. And I think when people are reacting to capitalism is bad, socialism is good, they're reacting to vicious, savage capitalism, greedy capitalism, cannibalistic capitalism, where you literally have elderly people eating their young. And I, I think we're on a path of destruction if we just simply understood that and wanted to understand one another and say, capitalism isn't bad. We all agree that cannibalistic capitalism is bad, unless your last name is Koch or something like that. Then you don't care. If you're who's well, one of the two of them died, but the one I think David Koch died, but the other brother, he's still alive. And yeah, if you're that, oh, okay, they don't really care. But that represents an infinitesimally small fraction of the total population in America. I think we are better people than a lot of people think we are. There you go.
I agree with you, Ryan. I think that most human beings are very good people. I think we are all good at our core, but what ends up happening, and I like there was an ancient Greek text, and I don't remember which one or who it was that said it, but is that all men see themselves as great as good men. And of course, this is ancient Greece, so women didn't count, so that's why it was men. It includes women too, let's be honest. So all people see ourselves as good people, and the people that we see causing significant unnecessary harm, we can see and say this person is doing evil. The thing is, they just don't see straight, and they think that what they are doing is good. Now, they may realize they're causing significant unnecessary harm, but they still rationalize it as good. And I would argue that it's not about whether or not someone's wealthy that means that they ignore this inherent sense of fairness. It's about whether or not they give in to egotism. If they're a victim of egotism, and the Koch brothers, I think, have a lot of egotism, and they, the one who died may not have learned in this life, but I bet you that he will be born very poor in his next life or something like that. He will learn the lesson of humility in his next life, and he'll be brought to his knees until he learns the lesson of humility. And I have a good logical argument defending that, by the way, if you want. But I do think that generous capitalism is, we are on a path of destruction with greedy capitalism, Ryan. You're 100% right. And in fact, I can logically defend that too, which is the socioeconomic disparity is widening and has been for 40 years. And the number two reason that civilizations end, socioeconomic disparity. It's what ended ancient Sparta. It's what ended the Roman Empire by a lot of accounts. There are many, many societies have ended because of socioeconomic disparity, and there were just too few haves and not enough money for the have-nots, and then there was a revolution. And so the French Revolution is another example of that. So, Ryan, go ahead. You have your hand up again.
Yeah, the Koch brothers, I think that because they acted so predatory in this life, that their just reward is to be reincarnated several times over as a mouse, one of the prey animals. So, you're going along one happy day. Oh, you got eaten by your mother. Oh, damn. Reabsorb those calories when a cat discovers the hole, and then you're just going along happy as a clam, and oh, you got snatched by a snake, and then you get snatched by an owl. You know, that will teach that. That will teach the value of compassion and generosity. Now, um, I had another thing I wanted to mention. I'll get back to it. I'll think of it in a minute.
Okay. One thing that I would say is I think that some people get, and I think they were an example of people who were so caught up in political ideology that they cared more about defending their political ideology than about doing what's fair. And when you care more about, defending your current beliefs than you do about what's true and what's fair, that's when you get into trouble. That's when it's egotism and you're stuck, stuck in confirmation bias. That's why, being the best version of ourselves, seeking truth and being fair is the first intention and the North Star of the five intentions, because that will steer us in the right direction if we use it as a compass. Every time I think that'll steer us in the right direction. Um, and and so I just want, I really hope that if that's right, that it gets into the minds of more people, and that's what I want to do with the FTI by growing it, is get more people thinking that way instead of, well, I want it, therefore I'm justified in wanting it, which is, in a postmodernist perspective, there's no right and wrong. And to the postmodernists, we had a discussion of morality where I tried to argue for universal morals, which someone mentioned Kant earlier, and I argued like that there are universal morals, and it was actually someone at one of the events that gave the example that I now use, torturing an innocent baby for fun. I think it was Carl that gave that example. I could be wrong, but it was like, if you torture an innocent baby for fun, I'm sorry, but there is no justification for that. None whatsoever. And I can't imagine one, and I'm pretty good at finding loopholes, like I said. Can't find a loophole there. That one's like ironclad, iron tight. No one has yet been able to find an example. DLJ wants to try. Go ahead.
Objectives orientated. If you want to take over the world, think Animal Farm, right? So when Napoleon the pig, he trained the dogs from pups to be vicious. So what, or Sparta is another one. So teaching people how to be vicious soldiers or ruthless soldiers, yeah, get them to enjoy killing. We are actually seeing that, I think, in one part of the world at the moment, where babies are being killed on a regular basis. And to teach people how to do that without remorse, you've got to. So if your objective is to take over a part of the world, yeah, it's right in their eyes. It's right for them.
You can.
It's not right for me. I'm not arguing for
Or
it personally.
DLJ, remember when I say universal moral, I mean one that every reasonable person would agree with. But I would argue by those people saying that that's right, they are immediately rejected from what the random six people that you choose from the world would argue is reasonable. They are immediately rejected from that crowd of reasonable people. And it's not
Right. So
because it's a majority, it's literally you cannot rationally justify that behavior other than through egotism.
and that's reasonable for our times. So
Yeah,
these things change over
reasonable,
time. So
reasonable.
therefore, that's why I argue they're not universal or certainly not objective or absolute. I
I
mean,
don't use the term objective because it triggers people like you.
yeah,
I
I
use
know.
the term universal, and I say that it's agreeable by all reasonable people because that's the standard that the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy lines up.
Okay,
So
okay,
that's the term
semantics again.
that
But
I
if it's not all, then it's not universal.
Well, when I say universal, I define universal moral the way that Kant does, which is one that should be upheld by all people. And I define it the way that the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy does, which is and I'm the one that came up with the term, well, there might be other uses, but when I use the term universal moral, I'm saying one that's agreeable by all reasonable people, which is the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy's definition of a moral that is not a subjective moral, basically, which I know you don't want me to call an objective moral, so I won't. But I'll say that's what if a moral is not a subjective moral, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy says it must be agreeable by all reasonable people. There is no definition of moral that has a universal consensus by 100% of human beings. You can't even get 100% of human beings to say Earth is an oblate spheroid. You can't get 100% of universal beings to say that you exist or that anyone other than them exists. And in fact, some of us would argue that I could make an argument that I don't exist. I'm just a figment of my own imagination, right? So maybe I don't even exist. I just think I exist and I'm fooled into it by some higher power that's a vat in a brain somewhere. What world is that vat in a brain? I don't know. But, and I don't know who the Boltzmann brain people think, or where the Boltzmann brain th people think are the beings that stuck us as vats in brains. But anyway, that's another story for another day. So, Carrie, go ahead.
Hey, this was fun. Um, so okay. So I've got kind of two questions. One is if empathy is the cure for ego, right? It seems to me that people are usually pretty good at being empathetic when all of their needs are taken care of. But once you start to crank up the stress, it seems like their ability to be empathetic decreases. And I think that's a huge challenge, especially when you have a circumstance where it seems like, there's such an inequitable distribution of resources, let's put it that way. And with regards to capitalism, this is kind of on topic. I've heard that economists or professors, economics professors, sometimes will do a demonstration where they'll have like a simple game of winners and losers. They hand out a bunch of tokens that represent money, and it's like, so there are so many winners, so many losers, and eventually what happens is somebody ends up with all the tokens through no skill or anything other than random chance and the rules of the game. And that is used as a demonstration that, potentially the what we call predatory capitalism might just be the luck of the draw more than anybody having skill or some privileged amount of decision making or being a good business person. Let's put it that way. Now, clearly you can lose money, right? That doesn't take any particular skill. But maybe the folks that are super wealthy just happen to be the folks that were in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
You know?
Or were born wealthy, right? So I could name a person that was born so wealthy that if they'd invested all their money into an S&P 500 index fund, which is how I invest a lot of my money, they would be worth 10 times what they are now, and they're called a tremendously incredible business person. I won't name any names,
Yep.
because I might get put in jail. Now. But I actually do want to challenge your notion, Carrie. While I agree with you very often, it actually turns out that poorer people are more empathetic when it comes to giving to charity, at the very least, than wealthier people, in that poorer people have a lower disposable income and yet donate a higher percentage of their income to charity. And I'm going to put a Wikipedia article in that shows this, and we'll refer to studies, et cetera, that show that poor people are actually more empathetic. For example, when they walk by a homeless person, they're more likely to give money. And so, I think it sort of makes sense. Like at first, it didn't make sense to me, but it sort of makes sense in that in society, currency is basically a form of power, and it's a form of you did something right in society to earn that money. There's a sense of entitlement that if you earn a lot of money, you are entitled to more freedom, because you do literally have more freedom to do more things. You can go on better vacations, you can go on vacations more often. So you're treated better by making more money. Does that mean you're a better person? Actually, it looks like the other way around. A lot of, the averages are that people making less money are often more empathetic. And so I find that interesting. There are a bunch of us that are in the effective altruism movement that want to make a lot of money to help other people with that money. And that's, I think, a different animal altogether, but than the normal trend.
So maybe there's a differentiation between types of stress because I'm thinking of like times when I'm late. I do not, I can feel my empathy slipping away because I'm under this particular type of pressure, right? Now, if I'm hungry, I get kind of mean sometimes, right? And then if I eat, I feel a lot better. That's different than I think than just being generally poor. And maybe there's an element there of feeling guilty for being super wealthy, survivor's guilt of a kind.
I'm sorry, Kelly. My daughters were talking to me. Can you repeat that?
Oh, where should I
So
start?
I heard is there a form of feeling guilty because I have more
Oh,
money?
yeah, yeah.
I didn't hear the
The
before that.
survivor's guilt for the super wealthy, where they have to justify the fact that they have such an incredible abundance of wealth over and above other people that they have to construct a system where they actually deserve it. This Calvinist worldview or something.
Yeah, I do think that we all want to feel like when we have success that we deserve success. And I think that wealthy people who um, you know, uh, you know, did not simply inherit their wealth. I think, and actually I believe a vast majority of millionaires were not born wealthy. They didn't inherit most of their wealth. It was earned. And I think that group of people does deserve to be proud of the fact that they were economically successful, that we were economically successful. But that doesn't give us the right to say we are better than people who are poorer than us, or that we're more important than people who are poorer than us. It does say that, like, and if you look at the whole insurance industry, it's deciding how much money our lives worth. And people like to say, well, you should never be able to put a dollar value on a life. Well, someone does have to in society today, because resources are limited and insurance gets bought. And if you're going to insure someone, the primary factor of choosing how much people are insured for is how much money they make, because that's how much tax they're going to pay. That's how much, you know, like they're going to bring to their family if they don't die. And so that's generally how it's done. Now, Does it need to always be that way? No, probably not. But right now, that is how it's done, and there is a logical reason for it. But I think the problem comes when egotism says, I'm more important than people with less money than me. And I really like the Muhammad Ali quote, which is, and I'm going to paraphrase this. If anyone has the actual quote, feel free. But I have my daughter in my arms, so I can't look it up right now. And it's something like, I'm not going to trust anyone at dinner that doesn't, treat the waiter nicely or something like that. And it's like, he went to dinner with powerful people, but if he sees those people being rude to the waiter, well, he knows they're really not nice to everybody. They're just nice to people who can help him. And so that means they're not really inherently a universally nice person.
Sounds good. Sounds good. You know, that'd be actually an interesting topic is what would and you know what type of insurance system for medical insurance would provide the maximum benefit and how would you figure that out? Or just scrap the system and come up with something completely different.
I think the solution is actually not about changing the insurance system. It's about making sure everybody makes a lot of money. And that's what the FTI's goal is to help every human being on earth make the modern day equivalent in the US in purchasing power parity of $100,000 USD a year, which by the way is not economically feasible. Even if we took all the money in the world and we split it evenly amongst everyone on earth, we wouldn't have enough money to do that. But the economy is growing so quickly that 100 years from now, we will have that kind of money. And right now, we're not headed in the direction where that's going to happen. I want the FTI to be one of hopefully many forces that unite to make that reality come about when it becomes economically feasible. And I'm hoping to plant the seed for something that will eventually do that, not in my lifetime, but after my lifetime, most likely.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Of course. What other questions do people have? Or comments or anything. Like we're now like hands down, so you're welcome to bring up other topics or things of interest that are tangential. So we've moved on a little bit from love and compassion, but we're still sort of touching on it. So but we don't have to, right? We can digress a bit, right? Like I'm open to talking about whatever people are interested in.
Remind us again the five intentions.
So the first intention is to be the best version of ourselves, to seek truth and to be fair. Actually, let me actually pull up a diagram because I made this and I don't think I've actually ever shared it at an
Oh, I
FTI's.
think you did. You
Did
were
I?
showing you were showing different versions of it.
Okay.
It's a work in progress, you said.
It is a work in progress, but I'm going to share it anyway because I think it's helpful for people that are new. So the first intention is to be the best version of ourselves, to seek truth and to be fair. That's the North Star, which is why there are three North Stars because they all kind of are guiding us in the same direction. The second is when we get into healthy thoughts, which is we transparently share our beliefs with other people, and then we listen with an open mind, which is the second intention, is transparently sharing and listening with an open mind to what other people say. And then what we do is we hone our critical thinking skills, which is the third intention, to reject false beliefs and accept more true beliefs so we can better discern fact from fiction and wisdom from folly. Um, Wisdom being seeking truth and being fair. And uh, so fact and fiction is about finding truth, and wisdom is about being fair. And then our beliefs get stronger and more solid and get us closer to the truth and closer to being more fair in terms of thought process. And this cycle purifies our thoughts in a non-religious purification way, but it helps us hone our thoughts so that we're more aligned with truth and we are getting closer to fairness. And then, and only then, can we actually take action where we first want to prevent significant unnecessary harm. And I thought about adding an extra intention because there is a clear prioritization between first, we should prevent significant unnecessary harm from happening to any human being. And then, and after that only, do we increase happiness and decrease harm opportunistically, with the prioritization being on the people we can influence the most, which, by the way, is my answer to Peter Singer's famous paper on famine, which, if people aren't familiar with it, we probably have a whole event on that. probably should have a whole event on that. But and then the fifth intention is what we were talking about tonight, which is to express, accept, and reciprocate love. Once we are putting our love in the right direction and we're making sure that we're securing our own well-being, mental and physical, and then we're positively influencing other people with the love that we express, accept, and reciprocate, then expressing, accepting, and reciprocating love is kind of the culmination of the five intentions and helps us in our path towards, as Carl likes to talk about, self-actualization, which I agree is super important. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
Cool.
I would add one piece of feedback regarding the graphic in terms of keeping it consistent. The first one, the goals, because you have kind of like a verb or kind of like a suggestion on the last two, but if we could find something for self-improvement as also similar. Like either all of them are names or all of them are like verbs or something. Do you know what I mean? To keep it consistent.
So, self-improvement, I think I had this debate with the WEO, and I think self-improvement, I'm trying to remember how it went. But I think my brain's a little too fried to address that. My grammar has never
Or,
been one of my strong points.
or you can make the other two names, like instead of saying be fair, just say fairness. So you could
Yeah.
say self-improvement, fairness, truth, if you want. But yeah, you're right. It's just kind of like a little just for
Yeah, I've done that since I was in high school. I know like I get my tenses wrong and I get my verbs wrong, and it annoys the heck out of anyone that's better at English than me. And I'm sorry for that. But maybe give me a suggestion offline on how to adjust that, Carl, and I'll try to look at if there's a way to do it and remain.
But if you had to, so imagine you met someone
Mhm.
and you're trying to give him advice, right? So you would say, seek truth, be fair. What would you say for self-improvement? Like you wouldn't come up to someone and say self-improvement,
Be your
right?
best self.
Be yourself. There you go. So that's a good one. Or seek growth or focus on growth or yeah, be your best self.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. So say that instead of self-improvement. It
Okay.
says the same thing and it's consistent. Yeah, that's what I meant.
Anyone have other comments, questions?
Oh yeah. Unless somebody else wants to jump in.
Go ahead, Carrie.
Okay. So this is on the topic of learning lessons. And I was thinking about this when Ryan was talking about the Koch brothers. Because I'm thinking it's like, okay, if they're displaying some character flaw that requires them to learn some lesson, right? Well, did they have that lesson or a different one in the bag that enabled them this position in this life? And if not, I mean, obviously you can make certain kinds of progress, economic progress, without, you know, I don't know what kind of progress you'd call it. This kind of, in progress with your integrity and your relationship with your ego and just being a good person, right? But like, let's say that I am a horrible person and I do come back as a mouse, right? Well, does the mouse learn a lesson by being a mouse? Or is it really that we experience lessons, right? Because I'm not born into this world really knowing much of anything. I mean, you know what I mean? I develop this sense of what I think might be the lessons I need to learn. But I'm wondering if there is a distinction here somewhere about what's actually going on Is the experience more important than the realization? In other words, are the Koch brothers learning a lesson right now that maybe we don't have access to,
They're
or
learning
is the
some
mouse?
lessons. Yeah, I'm sure that they're learning some lessons. I don't think that they're devoid of learning. Like, I think I disagree with them on a lot of stuff. I think they have a lot of misunderstandings, but I'm
Mhm.
sure they're learning certain things. But they are probably learning less than a lot of people who are in different situations. And and um I think they probably did something very right in a last life to be born with the talents and gifts that got them as far ahead economically as they got. I don't know if I don't know if they inherited a lot of their wealth or not. So I don't know the full scenario. I haven't researched them a lot. I've just seen some of their decisions and some of the decisions that they've come down in support of, like
Mhm.
Citizens United. They were big fans of because it bought them a lot of political power, and that was in their best interest. And so, to DLJ's point, they said, "Hey, this is good for us. We have a lot of money. It gives us a lot of power." And that was what mattered to them more than whether or not it was fair. And I think that misunderstanding will cause them to be limited. It's a lesson that they didn't learn in this life, but there are, I think, many lessons that they did learn in this life to be as successful as they were. And probably the one that's still alive is still learning lessons, and the one that died might be learning lessons in a new life. So I think we're all on a path of spiritual growth. Those of us that recognize we are growing more in the right direction if we're trying to seek truth and be fair and be our best self, than people who don't even recognize that we're on a path of spiritual growth and think this is just a world of where we should give in to our egotism, right? And do whatever we want. And if I can get away with it, then it's a-okay. Um, you know, at least recognizing we're on this path of spiritual growth, and we should be trying to learn as we go and trying to be seeking truth and being fair. Like we're steps ahead of the game, and that's part of why I want more people to recognize that, because I think it helps everybody, not only the people who are learning those lessons, but the people they can influence as well.
So
I think,
how do you differentiate though from whether we're on a path of spiritual growth or a path of spiritual experience?
well, I
Because
think
I can
we're doing
envision a
both.
world where it's just like a lottery and you have this different life, it's a
Oh,
different experience.
it's whether or not we have free will or not. And that's why the free will conversation is meaningful, because if everything is deterministic, we're on a path of spiritual experience only. Now,
Right.
I would argue, yes, we're on a path of spiritual experience, but then out of what we experience, as the Stoics say, what you experience is what you experience, but what you do with it is what you do with it, right? And how you choose to respond to what you experience is up to you. And actually, studies have shown that we kind of choose our emotional responses. Not always. We can be slaves to our emotions, but it goes all the way back to Shakespeare and Hamlet. Um, show me that man who is not passion's slave, and I will hold him to my heart's core. And all the way back to Shakespeare, he said, "Look, don't be a slave to your emotions, or you're not trustworthy." Right? Because you're unreliable and you're erratic. And so it's the people who can control our emotions that become more reliable, and that are the ones that we want to surround ourselves with, because we're thoughtful and we're trying to improve things. So yeah, I hope that makes sense, and I hope I'm not
Yeah.
rambling. It's been a long
No,
day.
no, that's good. Thank you. It's
Sure.
nice to put the pieces together because we've got like a lot of puzzle pieces, and then, slowly a picture, a worldview comes into focus.
Correct. And I think, what I've been putting together over the last, you know, I think now 7 years or so, is a cohesive life philosophy that's consistent. And that's what I teach in the FTI events. And then we have guests who teach stuff as well. But I try to teach all the things that I think I've learned, and then I leave them open to scrutiny, so that if someone has a reason I'm wrong, then I just improve the thought. Right? Because like I have no skin in this game other than to seek truth and, be fair. And if something is not heading us all towards truth and fairness, then I'll just change my mind. And you guys have heard me say before, those who are regulars, it's okay to admit you're wrong, because when you do with good judgment, you're immediately right again. You're just more right than you were before. And it's only when you refuse to admit you're wrong, when it's clear to everyone around that you're wrong, that you're ever truly wrong. And that's when egotism has set in, and confirmation bias is your enemy. And I would argue, I know for a fact everybody, including me, has confirmation bias, but it's when you're aware that you have confirmation bias and you actively seek out reasons you're wrong, which I do on a regular basis. That's why I present everything to a large group of people and ask for feedback, right? Because I want to find where I'm wrong. And if I find the places that I'm wrong and I fix it and I move forward having fixed it, then I get closer to truth and fairness. And then it's more useful to you guys as a community. And if we all do that for each other as members of the FTI, which is what we do as members of the FTI, we all kind of move forward together and help each other progress. And that's the kind of, synergy that I just love to be a part of.
Yeah. Amen to that. And Carrie, you pretty much what you said, when everything seems to fit together, that's understanding. And to me, that is what wisdom is. Wisdom is understanding how all the pieces fit together. And, kind of like your comment about how do you know whether you are on a path of growth or the experience or something like that, right? The fact that you're here, everybody else who's here, compared to anybody that same age, same gender, same circumstances who are not here, right? That tells you something about like what you're pulled towards. And I think that is part of that journey of self-growth, you know what I mean? As opposed to the mouse or the Koch brothers or something. Because you could also argue that they are, children who are like 5 or 6 years old who are way wiser than another adult, for example, right? What does that tell you? That tells you that maybe there were a previous Carrie, maybe from many lives ago, right? Who became wiser towards the end. Now they're reincarnated. They're already like wise, like maybe the Dalai Lama at like 4 years old or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
That's what I think is the whole thing with the karmic thing. Although I gotta say though, that would be one area that puzzles me too, about those that actually are reincarnated and they seem like very successful, but they're total dicks, right? And you wonder, well, gee, how come they didn't come back as a cockroach? They seem
Well,
to be
they
enjoying.
probably weren't born that way. They weren't born as jerks. They became
Right.
jerks in their lives. Like, I think we're all born as good people. It's through, how we respond to situations and what our goals are that we become better or worse. And
Mm,
if our goal is to be right, then we go down the path of egotism. If our goal is to seek truth and be fair, and to be our best self, then we're going down the path of wisdom.
okay. Oh, so let me ask you this, because this reminds me of something I remember in another
We do
meeting.
have
Oh,
actually hands up, Carl, if you
okay,
don't mind. I want to let Jenna go.
you get in the queue.
You get in the queue. Jenna, go ahead.
Thank you, Garrett. Thanks as well, Carl. Uh, I just wanted to uh, give some points on what Kerry was asking earlier regarding people who could still practice empathy beyond convenience. Uh, I think I think you brought up like the poor people who are still have like the ability to extend help. What I see like the first point is that for the shared struggle, I think people who have experienced hardship and poverty, they have like this greater understanding of the challenges face those who are less fortunate. And so like they have more of the motivation to help. And the second point would be like the resourcefulness and like their sense of generosity. So they develop these characteristics because they are more accustomed to be making to do with less, and might be more willing to share what little they have, even in difficult circumstances. And the last point will be the cultural values. I guess like in collective society, or when they are also more reliant on collective society, they probably perhaps view that helping others would gonna give them like help in return as well, be it from the universe or anything metaphysical, like these hopes that their good deeds will gonna be reciprocated. There is just like a limitation with the shared struggle that I've noticed, because even if they are doing that out of perhaps perceived altruism, um, I don't think this is like very skewed viewpoint, but like when they witness someone in distress, it can trigger like some feelings on discomfort on them, and the way that they give is somehow to fix this discomfort. uh, so sometimes it could feel like what they're doing is also self-serving, but I felt like when two people are benefiting in the end with this kind of giving, I guess it's still a win-win situation. So thank
Yeah.
you.
So,
Okay.
so
Now,
then did you want to go? Go ahead. Did you have something to respond to what Tara said or Jenna said? Sorry. Yeah, two things. One is, yes, people feel good when they give, but I don't think that means that they're being self-serving by giving. I think that it means that they're more in touch with their sense of humanity and compassion and empathy, as Carrie would use the word. I think they're more in touch with their sense of empathy because they're one day, sometimes they're one paycheck away from being that person on the street, and or they were that person on the street just a year ago. And so they have a lot more empathy for that person because they're closer to them and they can relate to them better. And in some respects, that makes it easier to learn the lesson that you have to be kind to each other. And I like to say, if we don't help each other, who's going to help us? Right. And when I say it that way, everyone goes, yeah, duh. Like, but then think about in our lives every day, how often are we going out of our way to help other people, especially random strangers? Not all of us are doing that every day. I try to do it very often, but I'm very conscious of that ever since I came up with that saying that, yeah, like I need to be helping people all the time. And so I try my best to help everybody all the time. Now, like, not everybody's doing that, right? And so I think we would all benefit, and it makes me feel good when I do it. Does that mean I'm self-serving when I help people? No, because most of the things that I help people for, like, no one really notices but me and the person I'm helping, and they aren't helping me back in any way. So it's not like I'm doing it just because I feel good. I'm doing it because I know it's right. And oh, by the way, I also feel good for doing it. And I would argue that another thing that I don't know why I wrote this down, but something you said in the beginning triggered it for me is that as people get more power and more money, we have more responsibility. And we also have less guardrails because we have more power and more capability. And as we expand our sphere of influence, it becomes harder to stay humble enough to keep seeking truth and being fair. And that's where a lot of people say, well, a lot of politicians mean well when they go into politics, but then they get corrupted by the system, right? They get the power and then suddenly they become corrupted by the power. And there's that saying that a lot of us like to throw around, which is absolute power corrupts absolutely. And maybe it does, but there have been, citizen soldier, Roman emperors that like Cincinnatus that stepped up, took absolute power, won a war, and then went back to being a farmer afterwards, right? So there are people who can take on immense responsibility and huge amounts of power and then just let it all go and go back to being a humble person. So I think that every one of us is tested in different ways in our lives. And as we progress, it gets, in some respects harder to keep doing what's right. Um, so yeah. Sabrina, go ahead.
So, before in you were somebody, I think it was Carl, talking about reincarnation and that the person that it's rich now or has a lot of power, they must have done like something good or um and I think qualifying any experience as being good or bad, it's not good because you don't know the demons that people carry, right? So just because experience or what you are seeing, what you are viewing from the outside might look good to you, but I actually might be in a worse position than you are, that you hardly have anything.
Right. I think
So so labeling anything as such, I think it's a dangerous position to take because everybody lives their experiences completely different. You know, for some people, having children is a blessing. For other people, you ask them and you know, they've had a very difficult life because, you know, their children might have turned to drugs, right? So so I think we I would say we have to be careful about how we label any of those things, and just knowing that somebody can take very little and be very happy with it,
yeah.
right? So it doesn't mean that because I have very little that I don't carry a lot of wisdom. So um so I just wanted to put my 2 cents into that.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said, Sabrina, but I don't agree that we can't label good and bad. And I gave the example of torturing an innocent baby for fun is bad, right? I'd say that's always bad, like 100% bad every time. Torturing innocent babies for fun is always bad. So I do think there is good and bad. I don't shy away from saying that I think certain things are bad, but I think your point was not trying to disagree with that at all. I think what you're trying to say is that just because someone is wealthy, like the Koch brothers, that doesn't mean they're happy. And in fact, after $100,000 at USD a year, more money, you need a ton more money just to get a little bit happier. At that point, it's really good wisdom that makes people happier. And in fact, there's a movement in Bhutan, or Bhutan, I think it's pronounced, in Bhutan, where they call it gross national happiness. They're not trying to become wealthy. They don't care about monetary wealth. They're a Buddhist country and they say, look, wisdom is what matters for us. We want to learn to be happy with what we have and not seek wealth. Now, I would argue like they'll be happier with $100,000 USD a year of purchasing power parity and seek wisdom too. And in the FTI, I want both. I want to get everybody to that $100,000 USD a year in purchasing power parity because that's really the inflection point where more money stops being a really big significant factor in happiness. And at that point, wisdom is what gets you happier. Now, there can be people with, you know, $2,000 a year of income, but that are super happy, right? In certain parts of the world where $2,000 a year allows you to live in purchasing power parity of being able to get by without totally struggling. So I think
So
I'm
yeah,
agreeing with you, but tell me if I misread you.
no, but so no, that was it. So because as long as your needs are being met, right? Because your needs have to be met, because otherwise you're in that constant survival struggle, right?
Well,
Um,
the
but
art, yeah.
but even people, even if you go into people like that are isolated, that are natives to the land and they live off of the land, they don't know any different, right? To them, and now we're qualifying them in some way that, oh, they have new education or they don't know this or they don't know that. They don't care. They don't know otherwise. So for them, that world might be great, right? It's just our perspective and our point of view that is being imposed upon them.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. Yeah, I'm not talking about the child.
It kind of reminds me, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sabrina. I don't know if you've ever seen Brene Brown's comment on when you encounter someone and they kind of mean to you, or you have an immediate judgment. But she was saying something like you have no idea what their day is like or what their past is like, and so to always have that kind of like empathy to at least that you don't
Right.
know anybody, right? So I think that's what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah,
So let me challenge you for one little thing, one question to clarify, because it's kind of connected to the comment I was going to make. If you were in a trivia game and somebody said, "Okay, quick, you have 5 seconds to name one evil person in the history of mankind," who would you come up with, real quick? One evil person, quick.
Genghis Khan.
Sabrina.
13th.
Easy to do.
Sabrina.
Hitler.
Hitler. Thank you. Okay.
Hitler was who I thought
I
of.
knew you were going to say
Genghis
that.
Khan actually was a very brutal guy, but he did a lot of really good things.
Yeah. But let's use Hitler because it's kind of, I was going to use that example. So in another meeting, I don't know, we were talking about something. The argument came about time or changing something, and we talked about the butterfly effect. And because every time you mention, oh, if you could travel back in time and kill someone that would prevent really, really negative harm down the line, everybody thinks of killing baby Hitler, right? And the interesting thing was, like, when we're talking about that, I don't know if Carrie, you were in that meeting, or maybe you were, that my mind was kind of changed a little bit because when somebody said baby Hitler, I would immediately suddenly thought of a little cute baby who plays with dolls and their mom is happy and he's happy and he's into art, whatever. And so it kind of like shifted my mind a little bit, that not to kill baby Hitler, but to kill Hitler when he's an adult and when he has that idea of creating the concentration camps, for example. And I thought that was maybe more fair. I don't know.
Because you
Maybe
have to find
okay.
the point where those kinds of ideas become
Yeah.
normalized in his mind.
Right, exactly. But then somebody made the comment too,
even-
that if the Holocaust never happened, it would have changed the whole world anyway. Yeah, like the butterfly effect, right? Like maybe I wouldn't have existed and such, right? So anyway, it was an
But
interesting philosophical debate. But
I would argue the point at which we judge people should be where they take actions, not on their thoughts, right? And we don't know what people's thoughts are anyway, so we can't practically judge on that. But what we should be judging people on is their actions. When Hitler, takes and their words, because words can turn into actions. When Hitler was saying, let's create these concentration camps, his subordinates should have said, you know what, this is wrong, and killed him. And there were actually multiple attempts to kill him by his subordinates, which failed. So they did, in fact, try to do that. They just failed. But that gives you a sense that he was so going against human nature and what a reasonable person would do that his very, subordinates would try to kill him. And so,
yeah, I believe you're making the Minority Report argument.
no, I'm actually saying what you're saying, which is you should wait until. Oh yes, the Minority Report argument, where you
Yeah.
should wait
But
until the person takes
is the
action. And
thoughts is the thought?
the reason is, because we have free will, and so up until the point where we take an action that really causes significant unnecessary harm, we can still redeem ourselves, right?
Yeah.
But once we've taken an action that causes significant unnecessary harm, at that point you've violated, what I would call like logical, law. We've, by causing significant unnecessary harm, we violated an innate sense of right and wrong that every one of us has. And that's why I've challenged anyone to come up with some case in which causing significant unnecessary harm is okay. And no one's been able to come up with one. So I would argue that's a universal moral, and it's always wrong. It's bad in every case, causing significant unnecessary harm.
Well, to follow up on DLJ's comment there, I guess Hitler did kill himself. So, but after it was too late, I think he should have done it before. Anyway, yeah.
I mean,
I have what about this idea that the Hitler as a baby was treated badly by his mother? How does that come in? Where
Yeah,
does that come
so he well, no, it wasn't by his mother. Well, I mean, maybe he was treated badly by his mother. I don't know that, but he was treated badly by a lot of people in his life. He was laughed at. He was, made fun of. He was hurt very badly, and that's why I say like everybody deserves love and compassion. The ones we think deserve it the least are often the ones that need it the most. Hitler needed a little bit of love, right? But what did he get? He got anger. He got made the butt of jokes. He got made fun of. And what did that create? It created a monster. It created an angry, hateful, violent person who was willing to do whatever he had to give him a sense of self-worth. And his way of creating self-worth was by putting other people down because he had been put down so much himself. And now I'm coming up with a compassionate perspective in which we can look at Hitler as not an inherently purely evil guy, because I don't think he was. He was created. Like, I don't think he woke up in the day and said, I'm going to be Mr. Villain number one. He said, I need to survive and I need to feel good about myself. And if you take away someone's sense of self-worth, you take away their humanity. And you should never take away someone's sense of self-worth. And I think that's what Sabrina was getting at earlier, which is, to let people like, don't judge people as wrong, like necessarily, unless they're really clearly doing something wrong. And then when you do it, try to point it out as politely as you can. I like Confucius said we should always be as polite as possible, and I think he had a good point in saying that. That said, I'm going to let Ryan go because he's got his hand up for a while.
Okay,
Oh, and
so
we're at 9:02, so I'm going to let Ryan and Carrie go quickly, and then we're going to close out. I got to put my kids to bed. Go ahead, Ryan.
say someone goes back in time to kill baby Hitler, given the knowledge that they have of what Hitler was like when he was an adult, regardless of however Hitler may have gotten to be that way. Um, so they go and they kill baby Hitler, but then Hitler never did do those things because he was dead. He died because you killed him when he was two, say. Because he never did those things, then you never learned about how evil Hitler was because he wasn't. So you didn't have to go back and you didn't feel compelled to ever go back in time to kill baby Hitler. Hitler did it. So basically,
Great.
you've done the most evil thing in the cosmos by creating a paradox and ending all humanity.
Well,
And in fact, that's the end of time right
yeah,
there.
there is a way that you can go back and kill baby Hitler, that is not a paradox. And I did this as an event another night. But basically, if the many worlds theory is correct, you can go back in a parallel universe, kill Hitler in that universe. Hitler still existed in the universe you came from, and so you did know about him and that he was bad. You kill him in a parallel universe, and in that universe, Hitler is never born. Now, I don't believe that parallel universes and the many worlds theory are actually physically in existence. So I don't think that's actually possible, but it is theoretically possible to do in a consistent way if the many worlds theory, many worlds actually physically exist. Time travel can be done without a paradox. You can go back and kill your own grandfather, and you can still exist because you existed in the parallel universe where you time traveled, but in the parallel universe where you time traveled to, you will never exist, but you exist as the guy that came from the other parallel universe.
One caveat to that is that you can never get to a parallel universe
Yeah, I
unless
don't
you
think you
travel there.
can, which is why it's a very theoretical argument. So,
Right.
if someone could figure that out, cool, they win a Nobel Prize. But Carrie, go ahead. So,
All right, I got my project in front of me now.
good
Yeah,
luck.
I tend to think of the going back in time. I mean, those are thought experiments. I mean, near as I can tell, those violate our current understandings of what is possible, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not too worried about it. And yeah, anyway, I think what's interesting too about, the Hitler, this whole genre of debate is, Hitler's views were largely derivative of his understanding of eugenics and genetic science of the day, right? If that had been different, Mein Kampf wouldn't have been written, right? Because if you read that thing, I mean, it's very much based in what what was implied by the current state of the art. I mean, there was a point in time where people were measuring people's skulls with calipers and trying to deduce intelligence from it, or the
Mhm.
shape of the head in terms of their criminal intent and whatnot. And I mean, it was, pretty much all been debunked at this point, but it wasn't back then. The other thing is, I can point to certain aspects of Hitler. Apparently, he was a great animal lover and a vegetarian. I mean, so I wonder, I think there absolutely were moral aspects of his character. He seemed to have a great relationship with Eva Braun, right? I mean, so I don't know if I buy into the idea that anybody is the embodiment of Satan on earth, this idea of either the absence of God or pure evil. Now, if what we're really measuring is the amount of harm they were able to cause on the planet, that's really a different kind of measurement, right? It's not the evil in their heart as much as how effective they were at creating negative downstream effects, which is kind of a little bit of a different thing. But anyway, I'll let you put your kids to bed. Thanks.
Yeah, sorry, I do need to. But yeah, I was just looking. I didn't know Hitler was a vegetarian. Um, but um, but yeah,
Yeah, that wouldn't condone anything.
yeah, it
Yeah,
obviously doesn't justify what he
yeah,
did,
but
right?
I see Terry's point though. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that the point that and that kind of I think agrees with what I was saying, Carrie, which is that he wasn't an inherently all evil person, right? He was a person with major misunderstandings
Mhm.
who was beaten down a lot, lost his self-worth, and needed to create and build up his own self-worth, and he did it the way that he was treated by bullying other people and making them look bad and making them the butt of jokes and taking the power and then his egotism made him believe he was right as he started to gain power. And
Mhm.
remember when I said as you gain more power, you get more responsibility. And that's, a Spider-Man quote, if I remember right, with more power becomes you have more responsibility. And Hitler didn't handle it well. So
Me too.
he could have handled it much, much better. Now he was able to accumulate that power, but as he got that power, he just handled it really poorly. And that's where, I think all of us on this path of spiritual growth are on a path where if we really want to, we should try to seek power, but also handle it responsibly as we grow in influence. And I think that's what we want to create a community in the FTI that we hold each other accountable to as we grow our sphere of influence. We also need to have the humility to continue to learn from each other and handle that increased power with positivity and continue to seek truth and be fair. And with that said, I'm going to thank you all for coming and for staying and for your thoughtful questions and conversations. Great to see new people and old alike, and members and non-members alike. And hope everybody has a great rest of your evening.
Good
Thanks.
night. Thank you so much, Garrett. Good
Bye-bye.
night.
Right.